Hello and welcome to HCM Impact, also known as Raising the Tide. My name is Brad Boyson. I'm joining you from Dubai. This is a weekly series of video and podcasts where we discuss material changes to the world of work with a particular focus on human capital reporting, or ISO 30414. What makes this series unique is that we bring together experts from all over the world, people who've been involved in the development of bringing human capital reporting standards to fruition. I want to welcome our guest today, Andreas Scheuermann.
Hi, Brett.
Andre, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us. You seem to be in the sunshine, but we're in the sunset here in Dubai.
I think there's a little bit more sun over there.
Yeah. And
But
a
we're
little bit
working
more
on it.
heat. Indeed. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this session. And we talk about many different things related to the human capital reporting standards, the ISO HR standards project. And probably the best place to start is just maybe give us a little bit of background how you became involved with this project.
Yeah, thanks for having the opportunity, Brett. I
Sure.
think it's a really good project. And I myself, I'm a consultant at Authority. We're focused on strategic leadership support. And I'm also a member of ISO TC 260. And so I'm quite happy that I've been able to contribute a tiny little bit to that standard. And almost from the beginning, since the project originated in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
But from my experience as a consultant, I can say this standard is almost at the core of many strategic thoughts on C-level about the future of company, about the future of business models, about the future of entrepreneurship. So in many different situations at our clients, we experience that the questions they have are mirrored in that standard.
I mean, isn't that wonderful, because I know, much like yourself, I've been involved in this project for over a decade. And when the project started, many people were sort of questioning in my circle two things: the relevance and the value add. And maybe those are one thing, but when you have an outcome like you described, the fact that the relevancy seems to be apropos, and I would suggest the trend that we're seeing globally, in the past 6 months, towards transparency, towards sustainability, towards materiality. It's an amazing time to be involved in this. So I guess part of what I'd say is thank you for your contributions to date, but we're also trying to get more people involved in this project. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have this discussion with you. So maybe in terms of your personal sort of proclivity, what was it that about the project itself that you felt that you had something to contribute to?
I think the out of my perspective, the big thing with this standard is to enable a totally new approach of people management. Right. At the very end. Management is very much, in many ways, a subject that's stuck in the 80s or 90s. In many companies, and has to reinvent itself. And so this standard actually is a way of reinventing one's own management skills and management styles and management scope in terms of not only people management, also there's so much links to business models, and you have to think the business through from the very beginning, and you can really create a new way of doing things.
I couldn't agree with you more, but I think both you and I are part of a biased sample by definition of our contributions to date. How would you address, some of the concerns that I've seen with people when they hear of this project, especially when they hear this idea, this word standards? Isn't that somewhat regressive, especially when we talk about people practices? Like, maybe you've had similar discussions with people, but how do you address that concern that some stakeholders have?
I'm making fun of it, actually.
Yeah.
think, ask yourself, would you do a different payroll sheet for different people? You have standards. All the world is standards. Would you have, for example, if you use your cell phone, if there was no general standard and you could only call people with your same prefix or your area code, where is the meaning of using such a tool? So standards is about connectivity. It's about
Yes.
bringing things together and making things more easier to handle. And so if people actually don't think about standards as long as they're first to do with their very own concern. And so that's the reason why we have to get into the details of that standard to show people this is a standard that's made for you.
I love that. I love that comment about, then people are a bit being, in my word, insulting to the idea of a standard. You made me think of another example. It's kind of like, and it's like a referee in a sporting's match where, if they're doing a good job, you don't notice them, right? But they're there. And it means, that the foundation is being followed, that you're allowed to focus on the dynamics and the creativity and the innovation of the game. And it's an interesting discussion to have with so many people. I know one of the things that we wanted to talk to you about was the area of thought leadership. So maybe the place to start with that in terms of standards is, what defines sort of thought leadership in terms of either workplace standards or this particular standard?
I think the standard itself is a great piece of thought leadership because
Yes.
it leads into the future. Look, if you're doing the things that everybody does, you can't claim to be a thought leader. Thought leadership is about thinking about the future, and it's about thinking things through. Uh, you have to go into the details. If you're talking on an obvious level, that's not thought leadership. If you're talking about general things, thought leadership has to be proved by going into the details, checking whether the ideas are related to practice, whether they can work, how they apply to a specific situation in a company or an organization.
Very well said. And again, this question may not be, not to put you on the spot, but I think, the 10 years that I've gone in and out of this project, and some people who've come on board with good intentions, with the best of intentions, yet their perception of the dynamic of collaboration and, as you say, sort of the future focus of this project is not necessarily aligned with the group or the consensus. How does that role of thought, I'm trying to bridge the gap between sort of thought leadership that's too divergent or too isolationist and thought leadership that really has a contributory collective value. How would you define the value of thought leadership related to adding value to this project?
I think the big value is like it's generally, for example, also in science. You can have many fancy ideas and you can talk about it and you can do storytelling about it. But from a certain point, you have to convene. You have to create consensus about what's the best path to the future. And therefore, you need a group of people that is highly involved. And that's exactly what happened with that standard. These people have been highly involved. It's not been about who has the best single idea of how to create some fancy performance indicator or what. It's about the general concept that's brought together by a group of experts that are all thinking towards the future. And that's the big value. It's not a single opinion. It's a shared knowledge of a group of experts.
That's really well said. I'm taking it in as you say it, because I just, I think, as I said at the outset, um, we're probably a biased sample. We have a very similar positive outlook and long-term thinking related to this project. But one of the challenges is getting people who maybe don't think like you or I involved in this project. What would you say would be sort of the net benefit to a stakeholder who's kind of on the fence or indifferent? What's in it for them? How do they benefit by these standards becoming more commonplace?
At the very end, it's about being more productive and being more successful.
Mm.
Of course, everybody who is selling a tool or offering some service is promising that. But the big benefit of a standard is, of course, that you can connect to others. You can connect, you can compare, you can take the examples of others, make use for your own purpose. So that's a reliable system of improvement, I would say, which is proven outside, which is proven by the backing of a community of experts, and which is just for the beginning, it's worth starting thinking of it. Nothing more. You do not need to have to do more. It's not about, of course, you have to buy the standard. It's about $130 or whatever. It's not a big investment, by the way. But just start, look at the document, think it through, talk to experts, and make up your mind. It's pretty easy.
Well said. And one of the things I've been asking some of the other participants is, and admittedly, these standards are fairly new to the marketplace, in terms of publication availability. They are voluntary. Do you have any examples in your working career where that idea of standardization has been extremely beneficial, that you can think back to it and go, were it not for the fact that there was an element of standardization, that the outcome would not have been as either productive or beneficial? Any examples that you can share?
I don't want to go into the details of my clients, but
No, of course. We
just
respect that completely.
just maybe from a more general perspective.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you take Fortune 500 company, a big international player, and you're talking to the HR people at the top, at the CHRO or at the CEO also, they try to improve their organization. And they're starting by testing tools. And once it worked, they try to scale it up and they do a global rollout. And that's nothing different than creating a standard. So companies are doing it always. If you want to use economies of scale, you're doing it all the time. So the question is, what's better? Inventing your own standard for some tool you developed on your own, or using a reliable system that's created by expert and that's also comparable, and you can have checks on it by an objective auditory.
You mentioned earlier this idea of a new era of people management, and I certainly believe that to be true. And one of the examples that I've thought of is in my career. I wish that these were commonplace many years ago, because that would have helped me in my career. Because I'm as a thoughtful, competitive person who believes they're adding value to their organization, the ability to demonstrate that more objectively, internally and externally, is something that these standards are enabling. But in your own words, what do you see as some of the material changes that will emerge from this new era of people management?
I think we have a paradigm shift in economy in general. If you go back 20 years, people at the top have been talking about improving sales, for example. Nobody talks about sales anymore. People talking about purpose.
Mm-hmm.
CEOs talking about diversity. we are talking about how to handle climate change, how to reconnect to society, uh, how to position a company in a dynamic and ever-changing environment. It's not about single tools and ways of doing this or that. It's about general concepts of steering, especially big organizations that need a kind of, let's say, governance that's somewhere in between uh, fixed on the one side and flexible enough to adapt to changes. So there need to be rules and principles, but they also need to be connected to the outside world. And I think that's the general aspect that lies behind doing business in the future. Uh, Connecting to the outside world, connecting to ecosystems, and the the connection is always the person. It's the human, and that's why HR management should be at the core of how we define business of the future.
It's such a good segue into my next question, because I've had people tell me, and it also comes up in the popular media, that HR as a job, as a career, as a profession is one of those roles that technology and automation are going to make obsolete. Based on what you've said so far, it doesn't sound like that. What are your thoughts on the impact that, looking forward in time, technology, artificial intelligence is going to have on the world of work and HR in particular?
I don't bother how you call this function in 5 or 10 years. But the point is, handling people, interacting with people, developing people will always be a human-to-human interaction. And it's pretty good that we have better technical methodologies that we someday may be able to make good use of AI and all the things. And it's good to automate things that are also standardized. Again, It's okay. We are getting rid of stupid, shitty work that repeats itself, and we can focus on the core aspects, and that's the quality of human relations.
Yeah, and again, this may not be a fair question, but I've often said, and I want to get your thoughts on my comment, that anything that can be automated was never HR in the first place. And some people quickly agree with that, and others will push back. And I think a lot of it has to do with the experience, the very personal experience people have had with the function of HR and the people working in HR. What advice would you give to people who would like to contribute? They find out more about this project, the momentum, the ISO 30414 standard, the HR standards project. If people want to get involved or contribute to this, do you have any advice to them?
Yeah, I think for quite a while, this project has been an uphill battle. There was many resistance over a couple of years, but there's we can see the top at the moment, and there is a turning point. And probably it's not even about how people can help, but how people can help themselves. So my advice would be just make use of it. Just join a community, just get more information, get more contacts, get more expert advice, probably share your experience, share your stories. It's not about helping that project becoming a success story. This is on the way, the train is running. So the question is whether you're on the train or you're standing at the station and looking after it.
What about some tools? Like what kind of tools, communication, media do you use or access to help you stay up to date, if not forward looking on this type of work and project?
Well, since my core profession is communications, that's a question that would do for another 30 minutes of of talking. I like social media, of course, because it's quick, and you can get connected very easy to experts and to people, practitioners, people that share their opinion, their experience. And I think there will be quite a dynamic in some don't want to advertise channels, some very prominent business network, blue colored. So I think it's just about joining a community of people that are utilizing that tool.
One thing I've seen, again, it's fascinates me, having been involved with this project for over 10 years, is just in the past 6 months, how many community, you might even call them affinity groups, there's different words for it, are emerging. And you know, the dialogue and the discussion, whether it's social media or other sort of more singular platforms, is really coming together. And I think there's groups finding groups that have been sort of like-minded for many, many years and are now sort of coming together. Are there any, I don't know, organizations, institutions that you would point people to as sort of leading the charge, or perhaps worth following their lead?
Okay, I'm going to the advertising section now. Officially,
okay.
it's from now it's advertising. Of course, it's very interesting to follow, for example, the World Economic Forum on that topic, and if you have at least a gut feeling of what will be going on in the future by following that organization, you're on a good way. For me personally, also, I very much like the work of our British colleagues at CIPD, for example. I like their work. Of course, as a member of ISO TC 260, many colleagues there, I'm following very closely what they are doing. And I think the HR community in many countries still has to wake up.
Yeah.
Interestingly, this standard and the concept behind it has been more frequently discussed among investment people. That's interesting. That should be a wake-up call for human resources practitioners. They often drown in their daily work and their tools, and often are missing the bigger picture of why they're there.
Well, and certainly that's something Fahad and I have been trying to work on in the past year here in our region in the Middle East. Is we've done different podcasts, different webinars, information sessions, and the dominant theme has been human capital reporting, because we really believe that as well. How about this question? Is, as you mentioned, that it seems like different stakeholders are more aware or more engaged in this general project of, say, human capital reporting and standards. ISO standards are just one standard in the global community. There's other frameworks, there's other standards. You've kind of aligned yourself with ISO, as have I. What was it about the ISO direction that maybe differentiates itself from other standards or frameworks?
There's only one ISO, and the I is the international. So as the world gets closer by time, we have to think on which systems we want to rely. And for me, the ISO is a reliable official network. Of course, there might be different standards, different models, different concepts, but if you want to create growth, it's pretty useful to work together on the same basis, on the same standard, so you can compare and you can derive knowledge out of the handling of this standard. And that's a growth machinery in itself for me. While if you use a concept some people there and there use, but you have no way of getting a general picture, you just make use of another tool, nothing more.
Yeah, very well said. You know, and I've looked at some of the other frameworks and sort of, I'll call them proposed standards. And aside from the fact, I love that, you know, there's one ISO, you know, that's kind of like saying, you know, reserve currency. Well, there's one. Doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily mean that
exactly.
it's the only currency, but
Yeah.
there's a certain value add to the standard universal currency that no other player can hold. But I also am an advocate on the ISO side because of the specifications, because of the expertise involved. To me, as a 20-year practitioner, seem to be more relevant. You know, said another way, some of the other standards, some of the other frameworks that are coming out, to me as a practitioner, seem to be a bit more vague. Is that fair comment? Or don't want to put words in your mouth, but
it is. Of course. Yeah. Also, you've been talking about sustainability.
Yes.
There will be ISO will be there in the next 20 years, the next 50 years, the next 100 years. The standard will be reviewed from time to time. So this is not a one-off. It's about a process that will go on and that will improve the standard and adapt it to changes we experience. And I'm not sure which other organization might be willing or able to do that work. So I'm an ISO guy.
What about the economic principle of first mover advantages? In certain types of industries, that is a definite advantage. And in other types of industries, it can actually be, as the expression goes, the bleeding edge, not the leading edge, the bleeding edge. What would be your message to organizations or individuals, thought leaders in terms of this project? Where would you put standards, ISO standards? Is it something that organizations need to get on top of, or is there an advantage or a strategy to lagging a bit? What are your thoughts on that?
I would like to turn the perspective around.
Fair enough.
What if you miss this standard? Look, it is an ISO standard. It is an official standard. It is an international standard. There are first movers out there. And while you're doing all your daily business and the stuff you have to do, isn't it worth just looking into it and see what's in for you? For me, it's not about being first mover or about lagging behind. This is on a timeline. It's not about a goal. For me, it's about a goal. The goal is to improve your organization, and standards can do that. And there is a standard. So if I was interested in improving my organization, I would just look into it. Pretty easy.
Hard to argue with. It's just, we do have many people, many stakeholders with different perspectives on this. And I think, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I think one of the valuable insights that happens when you collaborate with thought leaders, with groups of individuals who are making a change, making a difference, and I'll use the expression, raising the tide, is you often also get insight as to what's coming. And, we are talking about an ISO standard that was published, I think, almost 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so in a sense, we're not talking theoretical. It's real, it's tangible, it's there. But in terms of the networks and groups that we keep, it's interesting to see what's coming. And some of those things, aren't really appropriate for, I won't speak for you, but for me to sort of comment on. But you mentioned that ISO is not going anywhere and it's universal. But I'm fascinated to see some of the pipeline of related issues. You mentioned sustainability. Um, there's sort of the ESG sort of movement
Yep.
that's really out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And if people are on top of this, if they are thought leaders, they're doing good for themselves and their organizations, they really see that what you and I are talking about today is really just the tip of an iceberg. Is that fair?
It is. It is. It
Yeah.
is. And the interesting thing is that more and more people get aware of it. So you mentioned the ESG movement or concept. 2 years ago, almost nobody was talking about it. Now everybody gets aware that this is a path to future.
Yeah.
We all know about the situation of this world. We know about instabilities. We know about climate change. We know about social inequality. We know about authoritarian movements, maybe also. So if you want to do business, you want to profit and you want to do sustainable profit. So this is about stability, and a standard is one element of creating stability also on an international level. And so if you're not only interested in the next 3 to 6 months, but in how will your company perform within the next couple of years, and how will you be able to shape the path to the future for your organization, you need a plan. So, and effectively, this is a future planning tool.
Wonderful. That's really well said. And you know, I've learned even just in the past week from other members of our group is, you know, the European idea of double materiality, right? And then you have in the US materiality, what's happened with the SEC. And I think one of the things that I haven't seen in my career related to the world of work and HR is where there's sort of momentum on both sides of the Atlantic. You know, that really
Yeah.
there's a different
Yeah.
raise the tide in the US and raise the tide in Europe, and they're converging in a complementary way that usually doesn't happen. You know, typically you see GAP and IFRS sort of
Yeah.
battling over better definitions and
Yeah.
processes and global practices, yet there's this convergence that's
Yeah.
happening right now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so final thoughts, you know, sort of as the seed I've planted with you there. Any final thoughts on our discussion?
Final thoughts. It was a
Yeah.
great discussion. And as you mentioned in the beginning, of course, you are biased, I am biased, we're biased. I am biased for the future. And this is a tool for creating future. So I like to be biased that way.
Well, Andreas, thank you. Thank you for sharing your thought leadership with us today. And I'm really excited too, in terms of the content that Human Capital HCM Impact is bringing together. And I'm really excited about, you know, the world of work and what's happening in HR. So thank you once again for your time today and your
Thank you so much,
thoughts.
Brett.
Yeah, our
I enjoyed
pleasure.
it.
And okay. And thank you everyone who's watching. And once again, if you want to get more information from this thought leadership group, go to HCM-impact, one word. That's where this group of experts are bringing together and raising the tide. Thank you again. Good night from
Go
Dubai.
there.
Yes. Cheers.
Bye.